ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode number 335 of the Zombie Train. I'm your host, Ellis, otherwise known as Train Man. And this week we are taking a question from Midwestern 261, who, as we established last week, is now going by the name Fruit 261. And he asks, back on episode 274, EMD F45s and FP45s, what did you guys do with them? Now, this is a good follow-on to last week's question, because, frankly, these locomotives fall more or less within the range that we were looking at in terms of second generation, or I guess third. I don't know where the cutoff is. But these are pretty firmly second generation diesels, I would think, because they were produced, or no, maybe they're third. Well, they were produced at the end of the 60s, and they felt like something that were good. And they were, in theory, pretty good for what we wanted because of the fact that they were cowl units. And cowl units are like F units, where there's a body that covers the entire thing, as opposed to one with the cab up front, that's called a hood unit. And this is something that I very, very recently learned, as a matter of fact, because I was going through, for this question, I was going through some stuff, and I was like, so what does that mean? And I had to learn. Now, we wanted units like these for the same reason that a certain Northern Road wanted them. I think it might have been Northern Pacific or Great Northern. And they wanted them because you can do work on the engine and walk along the engine without worrying about the elements. In this case, there's an extra element, and it's called zombies. So, at first, it was like, oh, we need engines like this. We do. When we move to diesels, we want engines like this, so we should compile a list of all, like, the cowl units, I guess, and see what we can do with them. And I was thinking, okay, like, E units, F units. I mean, like the shark noses, they're they fit the bill, but why would we bother? And I was scratching my head, and I'm like, F40s, obviously. I mean, Amtrak has had all these engines, and there's a question with passenger equipment coming up, but in particular, we did like Amtrak engines because they were, at least the older ones were. They were that style of unit, and they were, I mean, some of them were more modern than we would have liked, but at least there was a pretty homogeneous fleet, and it was spread across the entire U.S. So, yeah. We wanted more F40s, because they were, squarely in the middle of what we were looking for. And then these things came up, and it was like, oh yeah, these exist. But, like, they're all retired. There aren't that many of them left. They're just scattered in museums. And so what are we going to do with them? There were some that had been in service in, like, the past decade or so. But not recently, There were some that got rebuilt and put back into service, but it was just like, okay, what are we gaining? I looked at these. I did look at the engines as a viable option, and I thought that we could use and should use locomotives like this whenever we could, but the SD40 or the F45s, SDP45, SDPF, whatever. The 45s in general, while they were a good idea, they were, I guess you could say that they were really at the end of their lives. The ones that weren't in museums had been dragged and re-geared and rebuilt and this and that and the other thing, and it didn't seem like there were any out there that we could really work with easily. And as was the case with a great number of locomotives that I thought initially would have been nice to have, again, with almost all of the other cowl-style units, like all the covered wagons, and the FL9s, and just all that stuff. And it was like, some of these are in decent shape, but if we really wanted to spend our time using these engines and really devote ourselves to using cowl units, which a definite chunk of me thought was the best idea for diesels on the Zombie Train Incorporated would be to go with these kind of units. And if that meant working up a production line to build new cowl-style units, then so be it. We could do that, and we would do that. And I sat down with some of our logistics guys and some, some of the other higher-ups in the Zombie Train Incorporated at that time, my direct subordinates and stuff like that. The head of motive power, head of, logistics, which is just basically head of freight cars and passenger cars. Head of manpower and head of supply. And some other people. And I was like, well, what do you guys think? Because at this point, this was at a point where we knew we were getting fuel soon. We had brought people over. We had brought people, over from Europe. We were building new refineries. We were getting that supply line ready. And I was like, this is going to mean a huge paradigm shift. So what are we going to do? And I laid out my proposal for looking at cowl units around the country for safety of crew. And I laid out my case for these are the factories that we would take over or repurpose or whatever. Mostly automotive factories because they had the kind of equipment we needed, and also actual locomotive plants where we could get them in areas that weren't too dangerous. But eventually we just settled on the idea that if you can stay in the cab, and there's really no reason not to, you should be fine. And also the point was brought up that the walkways along the side of a hood unit provide a great spot to line up people to shoot, which I hadn't considered. And it was proposed to me that we could use these as very small platforms that could kill small groups of zombies as we came across them. You could send any engine, if it was a hood unit, you could send any engine out and just line up 12 Marines on the side of it or whatever, and just have them fire away. And if they get too close, you kick the engine in and you drive a little farther down. And everybody has something to hold on to because you're right behind a railing, so it's not like we would need to steal an open-air car from a scenic railroad, which we'd done at times, or retrofit a flat car with handrails, or a gon, which we did often, actually. Using gondolas was our preferred method because they were pretty easy to come by. But even then, you don't have to worry about slack, you don't have to worry about, any of that stuff that comes with towing a car around. If you're just a light engine, you're just a light engine, and you only have to worry about you. And that, I thought, was actually kind of brilliant. And so we ended up dishing this plan to go full hood unit, which I thought was kind of disappointing. I really started to try and look for... I started working at it the wrong way, as one typically does when they're presented with a conclusion they don't like. You start looking for evidence to back up your conclusion instead of just looking at the conclusion that the evidence all points to, which was you just need to use regular diesels. And I don't... Looking back, it would have been cool, but I don't know how I justified in my mind that the best course of action was to turn over, or was to work up, I should say, a production facility for specialized diesel locomotives when we were surrounded by diesels of all shapes and size that mostly work. So, I'll have that on the record that I was way too indulgent in this fantasy of having F units basically running everywhere. And I'd gotten my way before, there were definitely a couple of people that not so subtly pointed out, like, you're just pushing this because you think it's cool. There's no reason. I mean, crew safety is handled by just having people stay in a cab. Wide cabs are big enough. You don't need to have the whole length of the thing, and there's no reason you're going to need to walk the length of a locomotive in that kind of situation. At least the reasons that we could come up with were so few and far between that they, the only reason you'd have to do that is, say you're on a passenger train and you are being besieged and you need to regroup with the people in the passenger cars. Because if somebody's there to rescue you, they're going to have killed all the zombies, probably, no matter where you are on the train, and anywhere is just as safe or unsafe. So that is, that was the eventual reasoning as to why it didn't really matter when that is the issue. And I was blind to it. I admittedly was totally blind to it. When we had sat down to do that meeting, I proposed that, like, look, I'm a genius, and they were just like, why would we waste that much time and effort and material making brand new diesels when it was just steam engines? We had a motive power shortage, yeah, but when it comes to diesel locomotives, there is no way that we're going to run out of engines, and we didn't. We didn't have to build new diesels. So I was concerned about a problem that wasn't one, and then trying to solve a problem that didn't exist. So that was all on me. I did far better in my working up of the steam part of the Zombie Train Incorporated, and frankly, I would blame that in no small part for my willingness to try and look for a production line solution for this, because that was a very, very, very different time from the one that we were in by the time we were ready to transition to diesels. I mean, by the time that happened, it was like, it almost felt like the war was over. There were very few places in the country that you could not go between settlements with relative safety. It's not like our trains were getting in trouble or being besieged. All of our amazing heroics, or daring heroics, or whatever, they came, thrilling heroics, that's the word, they came in search of steam locomotives, not after that. And they came in besieging of towns, and yeah, there were towns left to take over, but the army was strong enough at that point, it was its own branch, again. The Zombie Train Incorporated was capable enough that it wasn't a huge event to divert trains to troop transport. And the country was safe enough that the killing off of the infested cities, or, the clearing of the infested cities, was almost more for morale purposes and just continued security, in case there's a horde that forms from there, which probably wouldn't happen because zombies tend to get lost in those scenarios. Then it was for actually, like, yeah, we've got to take this area so that we can have it. Nobody wanted those cities back. At least most people didn't. So we were left just assisting here and there, and our main problem was, okay, how do we make the whole world run smoothly, or at least our world run smoothly? So, yeah. I'm sorry I went on a tangent about that, but the long and short of the answer is we thought they might have been a good idea and then didn't use them. We thought they could have been cool but didn't execute. I still love cowl units, but I know that they went out of style for a reason. It's nicer to do maintenance on something where you don't have a big cowl in the way. So, oh well. I'm sorry to say it. I'm sure you were like, oh, I want to see the escapades of these locomotives, but it really just boils down to a a managerial decision and more of a conceptual one, as in what do we want for the zombie train incorporated, and less of like a, well, we need everything, so grab everything. It was a different world by the time we had gotten to that point. So, hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Remember, if you got any comments, to leave them down below, and I will see you next week. This is the Admiral, signing off.